All right, everybody, we are back. You're listening to the Slipstream F1 Podcast. My name's Nathan. I'm one of your hosts here with Steven today, your other host. And we are missing our third compatriot, Ian. He is out of the country this week, unfortunately, so he is not able to be on this
Not in
episode.
Bahrain.
No, unfortunately, he's not in Bahrain. That'd be way cooler. Um, but he is out of the country and cannot join us.
Yeah, so we are so glad to be back. We tried to do an episode last week. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues.
Yeah.
I think the remnants of that are still up on YouTube if you want to look at our failure. Um, but it's been a while. We're glad to be back. We're in it for the long haul here. We're going to be trying to do live streams every Sunday at
hmm
4 p.m. Eastern, and that is 9 p.m. GMT. We'll post it afterwards to podcast. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much the rundown of we're back, all of
Yeah,
that.
exactly. I think we had kind of stopped because we're college students. I'm now graduated, but the other two guys still are. And it had gotten to finals and just a very busy time. Then we all kind of left for the summer, and we were recording in the same space with like kind of some shared equipment. So it was really hard logistically to record. We recorded one or two episodes over the summer, but then never ended up putting them out because they just were not very good. Um, but yeah, no, we are back. We're really excited for this new direction of the podcast. We're really excited to be live streaming every after every race. 1 p.m. Pacific, as Steven said, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT. So you can kind of watch it all across this hemisphere at the very least. But we're excited for what these episodes are going to look like. We realize that there's a huge American base of F1 viewers who are new to it. And F1 is catering to a whole new fan base, and having Logan Sargent in as an American driver helps a lot with that. And we're going to cater to the Americans who listen to our podcast as much as we can. We're going to use some weird U.S. sports analogies, sometimes some college football, some baseball. Who knows what else is going to make its way in, but we're excited. So if you're an American and want to learn more, this is the podcast for you. Or if you're from another country, we have some pretty good listenership in Germany, so thank you for listening. And you might learn a thing or two about American sports while you listen.
Yeah, we're excited to provide a uniquely American angle of the sport while not doing the shouty sports center kind of commentary, but still bringing a lot of valuable insight and hopefully bringing some of you new American fans along the way. So we're really looking forward to it. So let's get into the Bahrain Grand Prix. Nathan is going to give us our rapid fire 60-second race recap. So
60
hang on.
seconds is coming on the clock right now, and we're going to go in 3, 2, 1. Bahrain, the land of human rights abuses, but not quite as bad as Saudi Arabia, so we don't talk about it as much. But nevertheless, Verstappen got pole. Red Bull had a complete lockout. Are we really that surprised? No, this feels like Mercedes domination all over again. Please, God, help us. Um, Now back onto the race. Leclerc took a really interesting P2. He had some interesting strategy choices. Well, this is still in qualifying, actually. He took P2 on some fresh, soft tires. Really interesting to do that. They didn't seem to be the best tire for the track, but he managed a P2. While I have 27 seconds left. Verstappen disappeared into the distance in the race, never to be seen again. Very reminiscent of Lewis Hamilton in 2019 and 2020. Very sad to see. Speaking of not sad to see, Ocon imploded during this race. Just terrible. And are we surprised? No, absolutely not. Are we excited? Yes. Gasly rose. Incredible performance from P20 to P9. Leclerc had an engine failure. Who would have thought? And then lastly, Alonso passed both Merckx and Sainz for his 99th podium in his Formula One career. And there we are.
Very nice. I'm going to correct an inaccuracy. Uh, Leclerc qualified P3. He got to P2 on the fresh softs
Yes.
because he didn't do his final qualifying run.
Yes, my bad.
Otherwise, flawless rundown.
Well, I appreciate it. It's my first shot at it, so I'm sure we'll get better and better. But
Oh, I'll fumble the bag next time. Don't worry.
I say we make Ian do it, but don't tell him he has to do it.
Right, just surprise him with it.
Just
That's
surprise
what you
him.
get for being out of the country.
Amen. Yeah, really interesting weekend, interesting race. I think we're kind of actually seeing what the pecking order will be post testing. We talked about in our episode that failed what testing happened and what we thought the order would be. And I think we're really seeing a lot of what we thought come to fruition. But we're also seeing some interesting things But yeah, Steven, you want to talk about the Red Bull dominance? I mean, that's the biggest thing I think of.
Yeah, I think there was a glimmer of hope there Friday morning after FP1. The Red Bull looked just a little bit unstable. It's like, oh, we might be able to get them. Just a couple other teams were thinking, oh, we have a shot. And then come qualifying, it was clear that they were putting a couple of tenths on any team to the point where Ferrari made a bold strategy call. They just didn't even run Leclerc for the last qualifying run because they knew they weren't going to outqualify them, and they knew that if they were going to beat him, it had to be on a cheeky move in the race. Um, After Verstappen got off to the lead at the beginning of the race, he was basically never seen again. There was a period of time where he didn't lead every lap. Obviously, Checo led a little bit during a pit stop interchange, but generally you could hear Verstappen over the radio just chilling out, having the time of his life. Had limited tire degradation. They didn't have fuel pump cavitation like last year, so you didn't have simultaneous Red Bull car failures.
That
But
was awesome.
it the weekend started rough for Red Bull and ended about as well as a Formula One weekend can possibly go.
Truly, I mean, I think if they continue like this, the championship will be locked up not soon after Monaco. I mean, it will be done very quickly, and we're going to be, the real race is going to be between Aston and Mercedes of who's going to come in third.
I don't know. Ferrari might be battling for fourth here. Let's be real.
That's
Uh,
a good point.
it was particularly tough for them. But Red Bull definitely looks like they're the strong favorite right now. I think in race pace, they are just as far ahead, or maybe a little bit further than they are in pure qualifying pace. I think there's a potential gap where Ferrari will nip a few poles here and there, but in terms of race pace and tire deg, I don't see anyone coming close for a little while.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Which really isn't all that surprising if you look back at last season, just how they came out of the gates so strong, and were just so dominant for most of last season. But what is surprising when you compare it to last season is Aston Martin's just emergence as whatever Lawrence Stroll has done there, whatever threats he's made to that engineering team, it is money. It's definitely going to be the money. It's working. It is working. Helmut Marko had a cheeky comment to Sky Germany where he said, "Yeah, it wasn't just I'm forgetting his name, but used to
Dan
be
Fallows?
yeah Dan Fallows who went over to Aston Martin. He was Helmut Marko's, or not Helmut Marko's, but he was a head engineer at Red Bull for ages and ages. Adrian Newey's kind of right hand man. Dan Fallows went to Aston recently and took with him some engineers, and Helmut Marko made a comment. It's like, yeah, they must have a good memory.
Bear in mind
Remarking,
that Helmut Marko is just a dork.
oh yes, he's a professional, just pot stirrer. But he said, kind of jokingly, like, oh, well, the car looks awfully familiar. The concept is pretty similar, which it is, but it has some differences that I think are unique and really, really interesting. But yeah, man, it's when I heard that Alonso was going to Aston Martin last year, when he announced that, I thought it was a huge step back for him. At best, it would be a sidestep, but it looks like it is going to be 4 or 5 steps forward for him.
Yeah, it was. I was particularly skeptical going into testing because you heard the rumors of, oh, Aston Martin has great wind tunnel times. It looks like they're going to be good. And then I thought, okay, we'll see in testing. Because every time you hear someone talking about wind tunnel numbers, they're immediately just grabbed by the scruff by porpoising. But then they get there and their car is just on rails. And it it was shocking. I didn't expect it. You hear Alonso being positive on the radio, which is rare. Um, I
Yeah,
think he's just so excited for once in his career to have made a positive team change.
truly to not have gone to, GP2 engine status, but to have instead, as we saw today, fighting for podiums, having a car that is capable of going wheel to wheel with other cars. Because I think in the past he's had some cars that have been able to do that, but they seem really unreliable. Or he's had some fast cars that are just terrible at racing. They don't handle well, but they're very fast. And then he's just had some just tractors that have just been so slow. The McLaren Honda days were both slow and unreliable, and so there was just a lot of issues there. But man, Aston Martin is a dark horse for a P2 in the championship this year if Lance Stroll gets his stuff together and if Ferrari still is faltering. I'm really interested to see what happens with that.
Well,
But
it was an
one
incredible performance by Stroll. He
oh,
had broken bones in 3 out of his 4 limbs, and he dragged an F1 car to P6.
it's ridiculous.
That's nothing to scoff at.
No, and I've said for a while, and I think I had a hot take about this last season. We were talking about it. I said I don't think he's that bad of a driver. People dunk on him because of Daddy's money, and sure, right?
The
Without
Sky Sports commentators laughed at him.
yes,
At one point, they referenced that Alonso said that he thinks that Stroll could be a future world champion, and the Sky Sports commentators had to stifle laughter.
truly.
It was on the broadcast.
Now, I don't think that he will be a future road champion. I don't know that he has that level in him, but I could see him as a race winner. Really, I could. And I've said this for a while. I don't think he's that bad. He's been a podium sitter in a good car. I mean, he has a pole in a good car. It was a weird circumstance, but he's a good driver. And at first, yeah, he wasn't very good. He does make some dumb decisions at times, and I will call him out on that. But I don't think he's as bad as everyone talks about. But one thing I will say, lastly, on the Aston Martin thing is that their car and Mercedes' car, under the lights, when it's pretty dark, there's just the lights. They look pretty similar, and I was having trouble when like all four of them were kind of in frame for a few minutes there, or like at least two of them, having trouble kind of distinguishing which one is which unless they were pretty close. So that's going to be interesting, and hopefully when it's in the sunlight, you'll be able to tell a little bit better. But who knows?
Yep. Well, check your calendars. It is 2023, but like 2022, we saw Charles Leclerc's Ferrari crawling to a halt, and you heard the radio message, "No!" And over the break, Gunther Steiner said Ferrari's engine is a bomb, and I don't think he meant the double meaning of it exploding again, but it did. The Ferrari's
Ooh.
reliability woes are back, and they are back with a vengeance, robbing Leclerc of another podium and putting Ferrari behind the 8 ball going into the season.
And it reminds me of this meme that just goes, man lost a bit of hope that he didn't even realize he had. And I feel like that's Charles Leclerc. Like, you just have to think, man, that has to really weigh on a man. That many just being so close, but nothing that he's had is just hilarious to me.
He had to be going into the season with such optimism. He's, renewed a focus, being freshly single. He no longer has Bonotto, just saying just the most random things. The car has weight savings like everyone else. It's got this new S duct innovation. He's got to be feeling so good, so refreshed. It's like new year, new Leclerc, and then it just goes kaput.
Yeah, it's just done. It's really sad. I mean, I feel bad for the man. But who would have thought it wasn't Mattia who was the problem? He didn't have a button to cause their engine to explode.
Yeah, it's another one of the Cars 2 situations. Worth considering that this is the inverse of how last season started, with the mechanical failure for Ferrari instead of Red Bull.
That
But
is
you're not going
true.
to hear me mention the Bahrain curse. Do not
Af-
believe in it.
After last year, after the first race, I was very confident in me saying, Ferrari, well, it's done. They've locked it up. They're winning the championship. And we saw how that went.
Lost it by the summer break.
Truly, truly. Speaking of problems and failures and just simply a mess, we have McLaren. Wow, that is not a good team right now. They have deep structural issues, I think, with their management. Their car is slow. There's no other way to put it. It doesn't look like it handles well either. It's just not a good car. And, Piastri is in that seat as a rookie. Not, we'll talk about the rookies later, but yeah, I'm just not super impressed, to be perfectly honest. I know he had some mechanical troubles, but still, it's not It's not good. They're just in a mess. But they're like, oh guys, look, we have a billboard on our car that can change advertisements. It's like, that's great, but you're going to be in P18 the whole race. So what does it matter? Um,
The idea is that you get to see the billboard as you're being lapped,
mm, you know,
or as they're showing the fifth pit stop because you have to refill the engine with air.
it's such a mess, man.
So bad.
It is such a mess.
I mean, I think even in our last episode that, completely failed, I talked about the indictment it is that Aston Martin has been able to jump up into the front pack when McLaren, infrastructure wise, as a team, is above and beyond where Aston Martin is right now. Even though Lawrence has been pumping billions of dollars into okay, maybe millions, into the
Millions.
organization, McLaren still has the edge in terms of technology, in terms of engineering infrastructure. They have the same engine
Mm-hmm.
supplier. They're both supplied
Mm-hmm.
by Mercedes. They had a head start in terms of where they were at in the championship last year, and it's evaporated. It's gone.
100%. They have technical facilities that are way better. They have had years and years. I mean, they had a good car in 2021, right? And they've regressed, whereas, Aston Martin, they had a good car in 2020, not so much in 2021. But then after that, like last year's car was terrible, and now look at where they're at. I mean, they are legitimately fighting for podiums. I think they could fight for wins. In our test episode that didn't really work out very well, our reintroduction episode, I said that Alonso was going to have a podium. Was I correct? I was, but I'm not going to pat
No
myself
one
on the
can hear
back
you.
too hard.
Oh wait, no, they could hear you.
They
They
can
just
hear
couldn't
me, they
hear
can't hear
everyone
y'all.
else.
So if you
They
want to go
couldn't
hear,
hear me make a particularly outlandish call, which we'll see if it comes true.
it,
Although
it,
it's looking better.
it's not looking terrible. I will say that.
I'm gonna put it in a
Um,
sealed envelope and open it at the end of the season or right after that thing happens and be like, see,
I told
see.
you. Yeah, something like put the date inside of it and like seal the envelope.
Yeah, take a hostage photo with like the day's newspaper.
Yeah. Um, but also, another mess is Mercedes. We can talk about them now. We can talk about them later. But man,
Go ahead, go into it, rip into them.
eh, th- for a team that has they won what, 8 constructors championships in a row. They won
8 in a
seven
row.
drivers championships in a row. They arguably should have won 8 drivers championships in a row as well. They were in the fight last year towards the end more than anything. I mean, they won a race. That was huge for them. To now be at the point where they've been so stubborn for a year and a half now, and however long the design process started before that, they've been so stubborn that this is their design that they are going with, they are going to keep it, that now they're at the point where they have invested so much time and money and effort into it, and they've realized it's not going to work. They've realized, and Toto Wolff said it, that they need to seriously look themselves in the mirror and evaluate whether or not this is going to be their design. This innovative zero side pod design and all of that, whether that's going to be it or not. I don't think it is. I think they're going to get rid of it, clone the Red Bull, and go from there. Um, but for a team with the amount of resources, the budget, the historical, even if it's just recent history of winning and producing just the fastest cars out there, they have their heads so far in the sand that they are like, this is the best, this is the best. They're so far into the theoretical simulations of it all that they are missing the practical ability to win from their concept, and it is a
Yeah.
problem.
So to use a college football analogy, I think the best comparison would have to be Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
It's a team that was on top of the sport. They were innovative. They were running things, and they ultimately just tried to continue to promote within and keep the same system, but the sport moved behind them. They were staying stagnant and the sport was moving. And
Yeah,
the sport changed directions and everyone figured out what Clemson was doing, and all of a sudden they're caught like missing out year after year and having to make broad strokes changes. And they're blaming, oh, it's just the execution, it's just this, it's just that.
it's
Maybe you need to
NIL.
change your
It's
process.
yeah,
If what was working for you is no longer working for you, don't just keep beating on the same dead horse, assuming it's going to work, and actually change your process. Now, there's a thought. You look at Williams last year. They sort of copied Mercedes' zero pod concept. The
Hmm.
moment they ditched it, they gained a lot of performance. Now, granted, Williams is still not one of the better teams, but if Mercedes, who probably has a pretty good floor concept already because they're still getting some decent times, if they put like some of that more vortex generation ideas to use the air cushion around the side of the floor, and they even do a rudimentary concept of that, there's a chance it flips like a switch.
Yeah.
And you maybe lose like a tenth in terms of drag, but you gain 3/10 in terms of underfloor performance.
Yeah.
It could be a dynamic change.
I agree. And I think some of the concern that they have in doing that, and we saw this in the last generation of cars, where everyone came out with their kind of different concepts, but Mercedes was clearly the fastest from the beginning. And then slowly teams started shifting towards that concept, but they never caught up really until the very last season. Red Bull was the closest for most of that. Ferrari had a couple good concepts in there, but they all eventually changed basically to what Mercedes was doing because they realized it was pretty much the best. But none of them were able to close the gap, and that's the concern I think that they have, and that some technical analysts have, is that if you just try and copy another team and what they're doing, you might not be able to close that gap. You might get very close, but you'll never close the gap. And while I think that's true of most teams, I don't know that I would agree that that's true of Mercedes. They clearly have very smart engineers, just some of the smartest in the industry. They very clearly have tons of resources, tons of ability to fabricate high quality parts, and all of that kind of stuff that they need to have to close that gap. I think copying the Red Bull concept or doing something very similar to that, I think they can catch up. I think they could potentially even pass them at some point. It just because of what they've done in the past and their ability to create a really good concept. But it almost
Yeah,
makes me wonder: was Mercedes a one-hit wonder, a one regulation wonder? You know?
it's a real possibility. There's two options. One is that they're going to slowly sink their way back into the midfield and just continue to chip at podiums with like probably the best driver lineup in the field,
Yeah.
or they're a sleeping giant and they flip this switch and suddenly they're competing for wins. I think it's more likely that it's somewhere in the middle, and we go into next season and people are asking the question, should Ferrari ditch their concept because of how well it worked for Mercedes? I think that's the most likely outcome, is that we're then asking these same questions of Ferrari, who right now the only reason it's not asked is because there's a much larger dumpster fire, which is their engines.
Truly. And one thing about Mercedes too. The last thing I want to talk about with Mercedes is they their engine. There's some talk of it not being that great. The rules provided, the engines are locked until 2020, like the end of 2025.
2026.
Okay,
Yeah.
end of 2026.
Or no,
And
beginning of. Yeah, you were right.
yeah, end of 2025. I was about to say 2026 new
Yeah.
engine regulations.
Yeah.
So we still have this season and two more after that with these engines. They aren't allowed to change anything except for reliability purposes. So you saw the Alpine, what they reportedly did was made a very powerful engine, but sacrificed on reliability with the expectation and hope that they could upgrade that later. Ferrari has also taken that approach more than, not to the same extent as Alpine, to my understanding, but still somewhat. But it concerns me because Mercedes has not. They made a very, very, very reliable engine. It had very few failures last year. Um, the Mercedes team itself had like three retirements all season last year, if I'm remembering correctly. They were incredibly consistent.
And I think at
Um,
least one of them was Russell's crash at Silverstone.
yes, that's that. If I remember correctly, it was that, and then they had two mechanical failures, one each the whole season.
Hmm.
Um, and so, very reliable engine, but not as fast. And I don't remember which team principal it was, but one of their customer teams, which they have four of them right now,
Three
three,
customer
three
teams.
customer teams and Mercedes. So it's taking up 40% of the grid, more than any other engine supplier. And one of the customer teams was a bit disappointed, from what I remember. I think it might have been
Well,
Aston
McLaren
Martin.
was in preliminary talks with Red Bull for a
Hmm.
2026 engine. Ready for McLaren Ford?
That'd be something else, wouldn't it? Um, but I think it was Aston Martin complaining about the engine this year of it not being very fast. And if they're complaining about the engine, imagine if they had something with the power of the Ferrari engine or the Alpine engine in their car. Oh, it could be very dangerous for Red Bull.
Yeah, the Mercedes engine, it's hard to really evaluate, partially because up until this point, you've had Mercedes and then the other customer teams have sort of been in the dumps. But
Hmm.
um, and Mercedes has had a relatively low drag concept. So you might be able to get better evaluation at this point. I know during qualifying, um, it showed that Mercedes was actually pretty fast on the straights, but that's largely still because of their low drag concept. But I do think they're probably the slowest engine on the field by a tenth or two.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, so now we are going to round up the rookie performances. Um, I wish I had the national anthem queued up to play as Nick DeVries takes the top finishing position for rookies. Um, he finished closest to his teammate. He qualified
You
closest to
mean
his teammate.
Logan Sargent took the top?
Logan's. Oh, did I say Nick
You
DeVries?
said Nick, yes, but no,
I'm so sorry.
it was Logan, and I hear the sound of a bald eagle screeching through my ear as we talk about this.
He took a relatively bad car, and yes, you could say, okay, Albon dragged it to the points, and you would maybe be right, but that doesn't fit my narrative. So I'm going to talk about how impressive it was for Logan Sargent to drag that thing where he did. He showed a lot of speed. He had some really nice overtakes in there. Um, he played the team game well. He did exactly what Williams asked of him. Um, it's hard to evaluate Piastri because his race ended relatively quickly, although his qualifying was kind of bad. But he's driving a tractor. Um,
Yeah.
Nick DeVries kind of got messed up by AlphaTauri's strategy. Just got hung out to dry on the virtual safety car. They didn't let him pit, and he was just stuck out there on like really old hard tires and got passed by basically everyone.
Yeah, but also he wasn't really impressive even before that. He kind of, I would give him the, Antonio Giovinazzi or Nicholas Latifi Forgettable Driver of the Race award.
Yeah,
He just was there, nothing special, didn't really do much, but, you know, he did not have a great
he showed
strategy
up.
at the end. He was there.
Participation trophy.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I, definitely telling that Tsunoda was battling for the points and not him, but you sort of expect that with rookies. Um,
And I think you also expect that with Tsunoda, knowing that he really has to show out this season. If he wants to drive after this season, he has to comprehensively beat the rookie Nick DeVries and do it in a fashion that is convincing enough to, potentially put him in the conversation of a seat at a team that is better. And I think he realizes that, and his back isn't up against a wall right now, but I think he knows mentally that that's what he's gonna have to do if he wants to continue in this sport.
well, he knows relative to the car, he has to outperform Checo just as much as he has to outperform Nick. And he also has to be outperforming Daniel Ricciardo's sim numbers
Yeah,
because they're not going to keep him in that AlphaTauri forever. So if he wants a promotion, he's got to be beating Checo and Danny Rick's sim numbers because let's not forget there's an Australian off in the distance who is just pounding hours in the Red Bull simulators, desperately hoping Checo does something dumb.
I know, I know. Daniel Ricciardo is just preying on Checo's downfall.
But Checo looked good today. Qualified just a tenth away from Verstappen,
But
and
is it the
ran a really
car?
good team race.
Is it the car or is it Checo? I mean, it's the same conversations we had about Valtteri back in 2020 and 2019. Is it Valtteri looks good or is that car just phenomenal?
Well, compared to the gap that he had for most of last year, a tenth is better than three or four.
Very valid. And I think this year it's been designed a little bit better for him.
I think so. They described as a team reaching a little bit more of a compromise, and I think that also has to do with Pirelli changing the front tire compound to give it a little bit more bite, so they can get that pointiness and sort of oversteer that Verstappen likes, while not necessarily having to do that from an aero perspective, so that then you can adjust the car setup for Checo to give him a car that he likes more.
Yeah, that's true.
Also
Uh,
helps that the Red Bull is under the weight limit, so you can play with the ballast placement and can do setup that way a little bit better.
that is true. I know there's some certain rules about how and where they place ballast, like they can't just put it anywhere they want, but they do have a lot more freedom with it being under the weight limit, which is interesting because their car is the most painted out of all of them, and they found a way to get it under the weight limit.
Heaven forbid if they just made it carbon fiber, it would just be full of water.
Yeah, they'd have to like
They
just
get
have
in a crash and there's just a puddle.
their floor would have to be like a steel plate to make it actually be at the weight limit. You know,
Yeah,
and
like
then it
you've
would
heard
never
of.
flip.
No, it wouldn't. But like, at what point do you end up losing performance because of ballast, just because of the weight shift as you hit a
Mm.
corner? As the water sloshes over to one side.
Well, I would imagine that they like the ballast containers that they keep it in. It's almost like a water bottle that's
Oh, it would
completely
definitely be
full.
very full.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's a
not gonna
funny, it's a funny
slosh.
idea that it's just like a bathtub in the back of the car.
Can you imagine? It's just like in the back they just completely lose the back end because the water sloshes and you just have a spin out of nowhere because of that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Any other final notes? I think we've got to give props to Pierre.
Yeah.
Had a terrible qualifying, but showed that Alpine has pace. Dragged that from P20 to P9. We didn't get to see what Ocon could do with it because he was just at odds with the stewards. He must have done something to annoy them. Well,
Yeah.
you looked.
He deserves it though. He's French.
Oh my goodness. You're right. But the onboard of him rolling up to the start line and his front wheels are in the exact same place of Stroll's in the spot, like directly in front of him, and he gets penalized for being lined up wrong. And then he doesn't serve the 5-second penalty correctly. So when he's serving the drive through penalty, he speeds, has to serve an additional 5-second penalty. How many penalty points do you think he got today?
I haven't really looked for it much, but I would imagine probably three. Um, I'm looking to see if there's a news
I think it
article.
is three, based on because he got three 5-second penalties. So typically it's one per penalty.
Yeah, and it also depends on the type of penalty. Yeah, I don't see anything yet. Usually, we don't know necessarily until the next day. But yeah, Ocon gave a interview after the race, and he argued that four other drivers broke the rules at the start without a penalty. One of them being Stroll, I guess it was.
It looked pretty bad from the onboard. It was pretty funny.
Well,
They
there's
gave him
no
a
one.
pass because he has a broken toe.
There's no
He
one
just
better.
doesn't have the touch.
No one better it could have happened to than Esteban Ocon, my least favorite driver on the grid.
For no real reason.
No, I just dislike the guy. I have no reason to. Yeah, I have to choose a least favorite. Might as well be him.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but we have a few awards we're going to give out at the end of each show. You have a few in mind, and I think there's a really good one that we can give out today. It's the Ferrari moment of the race. And this race's Ferrari moment is brought to us by none other than the namesake of the
Ferrari.
award, Ferrari. With that just oh so tragic implosion and yeah, just implosion of their engine just going boom and stopping working and the sad no of Charles across the radio. They get the Ferrari moment of the race.
To be clear, the Ferrari moment is any self-inflicted wound which completely sabotages your race.
Yes.
And in this case, it was the engine blowing up. We have another award for a Ferrari driver, and it's the Nikita Mazepin Unaided Spin Award. Goes to Carlos Sainz in a free practice session. Hit a bump, lost the rear end, flat spotted his medium tires, and ruined his race sim.
The Nikita Mazepin Unaided Spin Award. I love it. It's beautiful. Um, we almost had an open lobby award today. with Lance Stroll very nearly bowling into his own teammate on the first race. That would have been some spicy, spicy drama of the radios after that. Alonso getting out and just breaking more bones on Stroll, if that had happened. But luckily, Lance
Well,
Stroll avoided the F1 The Game Open Lobby Award.
the Aston Martin engineers refused to tell Alonso who it was that hit him until his in lap, because he kept asking. He was like, "Hey, who hit me on lap one? Are there going to be any consequences?" And they were like, "We'll talk about it after the race."
Checking, copy checking. It's like they're just trying to avoid it because they knew he'd be angry.
Yeah, it was a good race overall. Do we have any other awards?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we could award the McLaren the F2 car of the week if we wanted to.
Yeah,
Just
GP2 engine,
GP2 engine looked terrible. But I think
gearbox made of paper.
basically, yeah. I don't think there are any other awards that we have this week. But there definitely will be more awards showing up, and we'll be keeping a tally of who gets what award, and at the end of the year, crown an ultimate in each of these categories. But I think that's all for today. Any other closing thoughts or remarks?
We'll see if Haas ever gets any race pace, but right now they don't have any.
No, they do not. Go American team. Woohoo!
Yeah, one lap and one lap only.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much for listening to the Slipstream F1 podcast. We're here next race weekend for sure. We'll probably put out an episode between now and then, just to keep that content going for you. But on race Sundays, we will be live streaming at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m. Eastern, and 9 p.m. GMT. So wherever you are, go ahead and take a listen. We're really excited. You can live stream. We'd love to see you in the chat. And follow us on Instagram at Slipstream F1 Cast, at Slipstream F1 Cast. It took me a second to remember what our handle is. Go ahead and give us a follow. DM us if you want to. We'd love to interact with you, talk to you about, try and answer questions if you have them, or if you just want to, send us interesting news, memes, whatever. We'd love to kind of build a community around this. But yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
all we have for today. So thanks so much for
thanks so much
listening,
for listening.
and we will see you next week.
Yep, have a good one.